Good afternoon, my friends. Welcome to the video. So Gwent has changed dramatically in the Homecoming revision, and one of the primary aspects, I believe, which has alienated a lot of existing and returning players when we first got our hands on it, was the understanding related to maximum hand size per round card draws, as well as the card advantage related to those. This was an aspect that I got confused on. I felt a bit weird about it. But after understanding it, made the game clearer and more enjoyable. So this video is dedicated to those particular changes in Homecoming, as well as some good practices regarding them. In Gwent Homecoming, they have introduced a maximum hand size of 10. If you draw any cards over this limit, they will be discarded to the graveyard. They have also implemented drawing 3 cards at the start of round 2 and 3 cards at the start of round 3. So you'll draw 6 cards naturally over the progression of the game. What these two mechanics mean is that if you end any round with more than 7 cards in your hand, you will end up discarding one or more of your draws. But the implementation of these two mechanics does go deeper than this. There's a lot more to it. It means that each player should be playing into round 1 and or 2, at least until they have 7 cards or less in their hand before they pass. It removes the pressure of tempo plays and allows for low tempo plays to exist, so you can spend time putting engines on the board, and tempo is not as important in the early stages. And finally, it allows people to capitalize on players who pass too early by playing resilience, hand buff, or other next round setup cards. So we're going to start this particular section by keeping it very simple. We're going to disregard any matchup specifics, any decks that would like to go 2 cards down to win it in the end, or any decks that like a long round 3 so they play differently. We're going to disregard that. We're going to disregard Carryover, although I will mention it in some aspects. And we're going to disregard any card draws to hand cards, so card advantage cards basically. We're going to leave those external factors so we can just concentrate on the core mechanics related to the maximum hand size and the card draw mechanics. One of the primary overall win conditions of the previous version of Gwent has always been gaining a card advantage over your opponent. This was usually done by certain decks by winning the coin flip, so you went second, and then playing such high tempo that you beat your opponent's total strength and then you pass. This caused your opponent to go down 2 card advantage to win the round, or they lost the round on even card advantage. And both of these scenarios are equally bad for the opponent. Now, this is not impossible to achieve in Gwent Homecoming, but due to the maximum hand size and the card draw amount, it's actually extremely hard to achieve. You can't get into this scenario very easily. So the reason for this is that each player, no matter who goes first, can play down to 4 or 5 cards left in round 1 without running the risk of getting into this situation where you go down a large amount of card advantage. You can play down to 4 cards if you win round 1. You can play down to 5 cards if you lose round 1 without carryover, since you'll have to play a card in round 2 if the opponent dry passes. You can play down to 4 cards in round 1 and lose if you do have a proper resilient carryover and not something that needs to be activated like the Phoenix was in the PTR, because then you won't have to play that extra card in round 2 if the opponent dry passes. And what this basically means is that if you feel round 1 is unwinnable, you are free to pass any time before this point, and due to drawing 3 cards in round 2, and if the opponent dry passes another 3 cards in round 3, you'll be back at the maximum hand size again for the final round, as will your opponent. Therefore, any card advantage would have been nullified. So that's not to say that you shouldn't be attempting to win round 1. Round 1 is still a very important round. The winner of round 1 gets some really nice perks, in fact. The winner of round 1 gets to dictate round 2, which is very useful, I'll go on to that soon. And they get to go second in round 3, essentially reacting to the opponent's plays, especially good if you're a control deck and you've got a lot of removal. And you also gain last say in round 3 as well. Now, dictating round 2 can be a risky but very powerful ability, and it's your choice to do if you want. While you could just dry pass and take the last say in round 3, playing into round 2 means you force your opponent to play suboptimally. I mean, is your opponent going to play that round-winning Sihil artifact or the Ragnarok hazard in a round that they're not sure will go on for a very long time? and for every turn they hold back from playing that card, they weaken its value. But if they do play it, you're free to pass. But obviously you risk them getting more total strength than you, they play a really large tempo play, and then you lose card advantage in round 3. That's the risk. Providing that you have less than 7 cards at this point. If you're still working on 9 and 8, then you don't have to worry about losing card advantage at that particular point. So here's some good practices in general. Remember, we are disregarding matchup specifics. Some people like a long round 3. Some people would like to push the opponent out of a round, but we're just keeping it very general and very broad at the minute. If you went first in a game, you should try and win round 1 because of the perks that you get. You can play down to 5 cards if you have no carryover, and you can play down to 4 if you do have a carryover unit on the board. At this point, you need to analyse whether you're in a position to win the round, and consider that your opponent has last say. So you should have a decent lead that when they play that final card, you should hopefully still win. You also have to analyse whether playing more cards will allow your opponent to play a large tempo play, causing you to have to keep playing because you're behind, or lose card advantage if you can't manage to overtake him again. So, keep an eye out for whether he's got a lot of value over time, a lot of engines on the board, whether they be artifacts or units. Has he placed loads of Thunderbolt potions down that look a bit like he's going to do a big burst of value soon if you play below 4 cards or whatnot? For example, if he's got loads of Thunderbolt potions on the board and you play another card, you're going to start going into the card advantage loss territory, and in which case he may just respond with an Egg Glaze and then boost it to heaven, and it becomes really unreasonable to try and beat that afterwards, and that's something you really have to kind of keep an eye out for. If you are unsure or the board state looks like it's in the opponent's favour, it's time to pass. So at this point, if you lost, then you're going to have to play by the opponent's dictation in round 2, and hopefully you'll win round 3 just because you've got a better value or you can stop their combos. If you happen to win round 1, then it's up to you whether you want to push your opponent, bleed out some things, make them play suboptimally and stuff like that, or whether you want to go for a long round 3 because you think your deck's better. So on the other side, if you play a game and you go second in round 1, then you should try to win round 1. And this is very common. I think both people should try and win round 1. It's a very important round because of the perks. And at this point, you can play down to 5 cards if you have no carryover, and 4 cards if you do have carryover if you lose. If you're going to win, then you can play down to 4 cards with no carryover, because then you have the option of dry passing and you'll get maximum hand size in round 3. As an added benefit of going second within the game, you have the added luxury of being able to play 1 extra card more than your opponent in order to win the round, providing they have no carryover, so that you can get card advantage in round 3. So if they play all the way down to 1 card without any carryover and then pass, you can play all 10 and still get card advantage in round 3 by dry passing in round 2, since they will have to play a card in round 2 to win it. If they have carryover, this does not work, as they don't have to play a card in round 2. You can still do it, but you'd have to push round 2, and most likely with their added carryover, you probably won't be able to out-tempo them very easily. So an unusual scenario that these 2 mechanics allow, the maximum hand size and the natural drawing of 6 cards throughout the game, is a very weird one. And it happened to me, and it took me a while to get my head around it, to be honest, but if any player passes before reaching 4 cards, then the opponent is free to play down to 4 cards to win the round and still be at card advantage. So it's a really unusual thing to say there. Now, you can only play down to 5 if they've got carryover. Obviously, you can play cards to eliminate the carryover and then play down to 4 cards. So let me show you with an example, because I think it's an interesting concept. So, for example, player 1 has 30 strength on the board, and they're at 6 cards in hand, and they decide to pass. Now, player 2 has 7 cards in hand, but he's only got 10 strength on the board, so he needs to make up 21 strength to win it. Now, he can play all the way down to 4 cards. So he can play 3 cards to do this. Now, normally, in previous versions, that would seem really weird. But the reason this works is because you draw 6 cards naturally. So if you play down to 4 cards and you win it, you'll draw 3. You'll dry pass and you'll draw another 3. and you'll be at maximum hand size for round 3. You'll also have the reaction because you'll go second in round 3. You'll also have last say. So it's just this really weird scenario where you can play all the way down to 4 cards, whether the opponent passed or not, no matter how big their lead is. You can play all the way down to 4 cards in round 1 as long as you win it. So moving on to a different strategy now. If you want to attempt the card advantage technique from previous versions of Gwent, whereby you make the opponent go -2 card advantage to win, or they lose on even, like I said, it's not impossible to do. It's just a lot more difficult. You have to actually bait a really big bait, and they have to fall into it, and they kind of have to work with you in order to achieve this. So in order to actually do it, you need to go second in a game, and then you need to actually make the opponent play down to 4 cards or less. Now this is quite difficult. Some players may not ever want to do this, and they may always pass because they're scared. But if you make the game seem competitive, or that you're just behind in strength, and they think that maybe they can win it, they might continue to play cards. And when that happens, you need to play a big power play. After we've got past this 4 cards in hand, now suddenly we're in this card advantage territory. If you can play a large tempo play, something like the Witcher trio with Roach, that's something like 16 value, and then you can play maybe Jean Calvite, and you'll get another card which could be another 10 value, so that's like 26 points or something. That's a big power play. And what this means is that the opponent again has to meet that, and they can't ever pass. And if you get into a scenario where they play a card and they can't meet your total strength, then you get the situation where you can pass and they're -2 to win or lose on even. Okay, so it's all about getting down to that 4 card line and then making them play and do your big tempo then. So you got to watch out for that on the other side, but that's how you would achieve that. So if we add an extra layer of complexity and start talking about carryover. Now I did mention it in passing, but we're talking about true resilient carryover. So carryover that will have a body on the board instantly, and not talking about things like the Phoenix, which turns into an artifact that you need to activate, because if you activate it you can't pass. So we are talking about carryover for dry passing purposes only, and not for pushing round 2 with the strength. Okay, so a true resilient carryover unit allows you to go 1 turn deeper and still lose. So whereas normally you'd be able to go down to 5 cards and lose, if you have 1 piece of carryover you can go down to 4 cards and lose, because then you don't have to worry about playing a card if they dry pass, and you'll still get to round 3 with the maximum hand size. So no card advantage lost there. However, if the opponent has carryover as well of equal or higher strength, then it kind of counteracts your carryover in terms of dry passing, because you'll have to play a card to beat the strength of their carryover. So just remember that anything that needs activating isn't true carryover, since you can't activate and pass in the same turn. So that is it for this video. I thank you for watching. I do appreciate that I got a bit technical around the midriff, but to recap that, I do think round 1 is quite an important round, and that you should try and win it because of the perks that you get for winning it, like last say and the reaction ability, especially if you're a control deck, but also that you can play down to 5 cards and lose without any risk of card advantage loss. You can play down to 4 cards and lose if you've got a piece of carryover, and you can play down to 4 cards in round 1 and win it. And I think the biggest thing to take away from this is that no matter where you are in a round, if the opponent passes, you can play as many cards as you can down to 4 cards. So if they pass quite early and you've still got 8 cards, you can play all the way down to 4 if you want to, especially if you've got a lot of carryover, a lot of resilient, or a lot of hand buff or something. You can play all these and then still be at maximum hand size, plus last say, plus the reaction ability in round 3. So it's a really big deal that you can just play as many cards as you want down to 4 to win it in round 1, no matter when they pass. Thank you for watching this video. If you've got any feedback or what you think I should talk about next, what I should do a guide on next, then let me know in the comment section below. But I thank you for watching. Take care and stay tuned for more Gwent content. Goodbye, my friends.